So, afternoon, John, and lovely to have you back on the show. And we're going to be talking about UFOs this time, and mainly focusing on the Rendlesham forest incident from 1980.
Hello there, it's great to be back on your show. Looking forward to it.
So, obviously, we've talked before. You haven't written a book, have you, on UFOs? Is it something that you would be interested in doing?
I haven't actually. I haven't even written any articles on it. Yeah, possibly. I mean, I've concentrated on mainly ghosts, and I have written stuff on history as well, the Romans and the English Civil War. But yes, it might be something I'd be tempted to write about in the future. Always been interested in UFOs ever since I was a kid, though.
So, what got you interested exactly?
Well, it was probably the Steven Spielberg Close Encounters film.
Okay, yeah.
And I went to see that with my dad, and I was just knocked out by it. And my dad bought me a load of books on UFOs, and I also got the Osborne Book of the Unexplained, which one of the volumes was on UFOs, and he had all these weird illustrations of these strange creatures and UFOs in the sky. And yes, it's basically you can blame Steven Spielberg and my dad, basically.
So, I mean, for the biggest one for the UK is obviously the Rendlesham forest incident, which happened. It's also known as I find out as well. It's also known as the Bent Waters Woodbridge incident.
It is,
which is which I didn't know that before. So it happened on the night of December the 26th and 27th, 1980, and it was near RAF Woodbridge. Is that right, in Suffolk?
Yeah, actually, I live in Suffolk, and that's not far from here. I've actually been there to the base, because now it's like a sort of industrial sort of retail area. And one of my friends, he keeps his car in one of the old nuclear bunkers.
So for a bit of background for people then, what was the base being used at the time? Because you had a lot of US Air Force there, didn't you?
Yes, well, East Anglia was full of US air bases because we were at the height of the Cold War. I mean, in the 1980s, Russia had invaded Afghanistan. Ronald Reagan had become president, and he was very concerned about Russian expansion. And as a sort of teenager, I can remember being quite scared at times because you thought, World War III could kick off at any time. You had the Freds film, which was on BBC about nuclear war and the aftermath of how it affected Britain, and you had one in America the day after tomorrow. So it was a scary time. So basically, they were Bent Waters and Woodbridge were two USAF bases in East Anglia, and they were separated by a forest called Rendlesham. And so they were basically there. They'd started off as World War II bases. The RAF had originally occupied them, and they were supposedly, funny enough, one was haunted by the ghost of a German Luftwaffe pilot, apparently, but they were taken over by the Yanks, and they became sort of basically frontline bases in the event of a nuclear war or even a conventional war with Russia. They would have been on the front line. They had bombers there, fighters and stuff like that. So that's basically what they were.
So what do you remember? I mean, you would have been quite young at the time, but did you remember everything in the newspapers the next day, or it was big news, wasn't it?
It was. I can remember the headline of, I think it was the News of the World, which is now defunct. UFO lands in Suffolk and it's official. I think that was the title. So that's how I became aware of it. And I thought, God, I mean, obviously it was a bit of an exaggeration because it wasn't official, because to this day they deny that anything really happened there. But that's what sort of hooked me. And then I ended up reading about it. Jenny Randalls wrote about it, and a lady called Brenda Butler wrote about it. And I actually interviewed her once many years ago when I used to do a show for a radio station based in Framlingham, actually, is where I live now. And later I went to Rendlesham Forest, and there's a UFO trail there now, and you can actually follow the route that the airmen took, and there's even a model of what was supposedly seen there, this weird looking UFO. It's very small, actually. It's probably about 3 meters long and 3 meters high, but it's a tourist attraction now. So it's big money, basically. And you can
absolutely
buy a pamphlet and follow what happened.
Yeah. Well, I noticed as well a few years ago they made an independent film. It was simply called something like the Rendlesham Forest Incident, independent film company. And I know it was featured on Strange But True in the 90s. So
It was.
And it's in countless books. I mean, I was reading up on this yesterday, and I went into all my UFO books, and I managed to find it in pretty much all the books I own on UFOs. So you described it earlier as the Britain's Roswell.
It is. It has been described as that. I mean, basically, what happened? It was 3 a.m. on the 26th of December. These lights were seen to descend into the forest, Rendlesham Forest. And I mean, interestingly enough, Colonel Holt, who was based on the base, his memo stated it was the 27th, but as he didn't write that memo until January of the following year, he's probably misremembered the date.
I don't believe he was.
So there is inconsistencies with the dates, but I don't think we should sort of draw too much.
No, and I don't think he went out on the first night, did he?
He didn't. Basically, it was these three guys. There was a chap called Penniston, a chap called Burrows, and a chap called, I think it was Cambersack. And they went out to see what was going on, because obviously, you know, the height of the Cold War, strange lights seen near
and just for clarification for people listening, they were part of the military, weren't they? These
they were part of the US military airmen, and what I should point out at the time, although this was not known, that base, Bentwaters, nuclear weapons were stored there. I've had this from an independent source. A friend of mine, his friend actually worked on that base, and yes, there were nuclear weapons stored there. It was something that was kept from the public at the time. Basically, they tried to make out the nuclear, because they were called cruise missiles. So they were, you know, in the event of a war, they would have been fired at Russia. But they were definitely kept there. But the misinformation at the time, people thought they were a place called Greenham Common. I don't know if your older listeners might remember that these women had a big camp there, you know, peace protesters. But actually, there was no weapons there. So there were nuclear weapons there. So that is why they were concerned, and they sent out these guys to have a look. And basically, unfortunately, there's a lot of inconsistencies about what they saw, because the original statements are not as detailed as the ones that were later put out, particularly by Penniston and Burrows. The initial statements claimed that they saw these lights in the forest. I think it was Cambersack said, it turned out that he thought it was just from a farmhouse, and possibly as a lighthouse, Orford Ness, which is not there anymore. It was going to fall into the sea. They demolished it. Penniston claimed to have seen a craft. He initially described it as, in a sketch, it looked like a box on legs, although he later changed this and elaborated it. And Burrows also said that they were chasing lights, and even said, I think he mentioned the lighthouse as well. So that was the initial report. The police were informed, the Suffolk police. They went out and had a look at the ground about, I think it was 4 a.m. in the morning. They actually saw traces on the ground of what it was suggested was sort of landing pads, although the police were very dismissive and said, it's just marks made by animals in the forest. And they also were very dismissive of the lights and said, it's the Orford Ness lighthouse, which did partly flash into the forest. It is a myth when people say that it could not be seen from the forest. The back of it was painted white, so it wouldn't shine into nearby villages and farms, but it wasn't completely painted, so from one certain angle it would still shine into the forest.
So would trained military, I was questioning myself earlier actually when I was writing notes, and I was thinking, would trained military personnel really be able to mistake a lighthouse? I mean, they would have been on the base for a while before they observed this craft, so would they not realise that there's a lighthouse nearby?
You would think so, and I think Penniston said he'd never been into the woods before, but you would think so. And I know that the debunkers do pick the lighthouse as the main reason, and we'll get onto this later, but for instance, in the Holt recording, which we'll talk about shortly, no doubt, he does mention there was a 5-second interval with a light flashing, which does actually coincide exactly with the lighthouse. But yeah, you would think that they'd be aware of the lighthouse being there, and then it could be seen in the forest. Now, the other argument is that they were unfamiliar with the wood and didn't realise. But it does seem a bit strange, shall we say, that they wouldn't be aware of the lighthouse. So yeah, but there are certain inconsistencies with the original statements, which is problematic. But there again, sort of over time, people do remember things incorrectly. For instance, in the original statement, Penniston doesn't refer to approaching the craft and touching it, which he later did, which no doubt we'll talk about. I think he said he was within 50 meters of it, and he also described it, as I said, was as a box with sort of like sticks underneath it, or rods. In the sketch, it looks like that.
I've got some notes here, actually. Yeah, I've got some notes here saying Penniston reported feeling a sense of static electricity as he approached the craft, and he saw markings on it like nothing, to quote, like nothing I have ever seen before. It was a language I couldn't understand.
Yes, I think he described them as almost like Egyptian writing, the ancient Egyptians, their hieroglyphics. But in the original statement, he doesn't state that at all. That's the concerning thing. He also claimed that there was missing time. And there was a chap called Chandler that was in constant contact with them on the base, and he claimed that there was no breaks in transmission, so there was no missing time. Because Penniston said he was like, for up to 45 minutes, apparently he was missing, and they were looking for him in Burrows. But other people deny that. See, this is the problem with this story. There's many inconsistencies. We're talking about something that happened in 1980, and things get changed over time. So there's a lot of misinformation out there about this case. Don't get me wrong, I'm not debunking it or anything like that, but certainly in his initial report, he doesn't refer to any of this.
So what happened? The men witnessed this, and then they returned to the base to report the incident, and it was
they did, yes, and they made statements which are available online. You can actually read them. So, and also Penniston and Burrows made sketches of what they'd seen. Burrows made sketches of the lights, which are an interesting formation, which certainly didn't look like a lighthouse, I hasten to add. Whereas Penniston, as I said, he sketched something that looked like a box on legs. So yeah.
Wow. And it's the following night that the Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Holt, got involved, wasn't it?
Well, actually, it's the 28th.
Right.
And although in his memorandum, I believe he refers to it as the 29th, although, again, as he didn't write it to the end of January, he probably just got the dates wrong. He was told that the lights are back. So he thought, right, we better go out and investigate this. Because, again,
at first, do you know if he was a bit dismissive of it and thinking the men were perhaps playing a prank or something?
I don't think he was that concerned the first time. I could be wrong, but I'm not. I don't think. I mean, if, for instance, they never went out and did a massive search of the area the following day, and sort of, called in dozens of military experts or whatever to test.
It sounds like he wasn't too worried then on that note.
No, I don't. From what I understand, he wasn't too concerned, although perhaps he should have been, obviously, as this was a nuclear base and it was the height of the Cold War. But yes, they basically went out, and the crucial thing is they took Geiger counters out, and also Holt had a recorder, and he recorded their investigation, and part of that recording is actually online. So if you Google it or put it in YouTube, it does come up, so you can listen to and there's also transcripts as well. I don't think the full tape has ever been released for some reason, only edited bits, but it is out there.
So for me, this part gets a bit sort of confusing. You know that he goes back out, but they took a dictaphone or a microphone or whatever they had at the time he could get his hands on. I've always questioned why they didn't take a stills camera or even a camcorder. I mean, it is 1980 and they would have been available.
Yeah, well, it's claimed that stills photographs were taken, but they were later lost, or conveniently, some would say. Although on the audio tape, there's no mention of any cameras being taken or photo. I mean, obviously it was at night, but you would have had presumably flashes on the cameras, because obviously back then we didn't have digital cameras. So sometimes the camera I had in 1980, you literally had to fix a flash to it, and you took one picture and then it burned itself out, and then it'd go on to the next. It was like a square. I don't know if you remember the old flashes that we used to have.
Yeah.
You literally had 4 flashes for every little square flash, and then you had to discard it. But yeah, as I said, they did claim that the photographs had been taken, but none have ever surfaced.
It's a real shame, because what they were witnessing was a very visual incident, you could call it. So all we're left with, rather than anything on tape or stills picture, is just their narrative of what they're witnessing. Now, the conspiracy theorists will say that the government have covered it up, and But most of us will look at that and say they're just narrating something that we can't visually see. It's not like when you show someone like footage of the Loch Ness monster, for example, where you can visually see something and to say, well, that looks fake to me, that's not real. There's nothing to actually see with our own eyes.
Yes, it is unfortunate. I know later on a poacher claimed that he was in the wood that night, or the forest that night, and he was hiding because obviously he saw these American airmen and he shouldn't have been there, and he took photographs. But the problem is they're so hazy, you can't really see anything, and the suggestion is they've been faked. And so my opinion of them is I'm on the fence with it. Why did he wait so long? And two, you can't really see anything. I mean, it's so hazy or grainy. It's just like a light, but it could be anywhere. So, and obviously you do get people sort of jump onto the bandwagon who perhaps, weren't there at the time but want a bit of the fame, because it is one of the most famous UFO cases in the world, not just Britain. So, yeah, it is unfortunate. But as I said, people claim that photos were taken. They've all been lost, apart from this alleged poacher.
Yeah, and I guess it might not, looking at it, it might have not been that easy to get their hands on a camcorder or a videotape recorder.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, they might not have had anything like that on the base. And, if they didn't have any flashes, because, I mean, some cameras had flashes built into them, but as I said, the camera I had back at that time didn't. So perhaps they just didn't have any flashes, and they thought, oh, what's the point? Because if you take it, I know, he might have picked up something without a flash, but probably not. Did
anyone higher up in the military ever comment to sort of dismiss the incident?
It was dismissed, yeah. For instance, the Ministry of Defence, Holt wrote this memo to them. Apparently it didn't even respond from what I remember. They certainly weren't concerned. And I think Holt's immediate superior, I can't remember his name now, but he particularly wasn't bothered either. The general consensus is it was all like, it was a lighthouse, and they, like marks on the trees and things like that, and these holes in the ground were woodcutters' marks, or like rabbits making marks in the soil or whatever. So it was basically just all dismissed. It's a bit concerning though, because as I said, it was a nuclear base. You thought there would have been a full investigation, and this is obviously why a lot of people who believe it was a UFO, so that's why they swept it under the carpet, because they didn't want people to know that UFOs are buzzing around nuclear bases.
But that would make sense, wouldn't it? If a UFO was going to visit, it is normally sites of interest, like military sites, that they seem to be around in the area.
They do, as is happening now in America with these so-called drones that have been sighted over military bases. Strangely, the outgoing President Biden, didn't seem particularly bothered about it. So, which is again a bit surprising. Trump seems to be more interested in it. So we'll see what happens when he becomes president tomorrow. But it's interesting. I also should mention that they took these. I did say the Geiger counters, and they did record. I think they claimed levels 10 times higher than normal in the forest, in the area where the craft supposedly landed. And they also saw damage to branches, as if something had come through the trees. Although, again, people claim that the branches were damaged due to a storm, and that the radiation wasn't as high as they claimed, or that the equipment they're using wasn't really suitable for what they were using it for. So there's always another counter explanation. When you say, yes, there was high levels of radiation, someone will come back and say, well, actually, no, you're wrong.
So what do UFO researchers and enthusiasts think? Is it quite mixed on yes or no?
It's divided the community, actually, the UFO community. For instance, Jenny Randles believes that it wasn't extraterrestrial. Others are convinced it was, that it's a massive cover-up, and we'll never really get to the bottom of it. There's even allegations that the Ministry of Defence have retrieved fragments of a UFO that might have been connected with this incident. The skeptics claim that it was the lighthouse, that there was a Russian satellite that re-entered the atmosphere on the first night. The weirdest explanation is that it was the SAS. Apparently, and again, there's no evidence for this, no one's ever come forward, but apparently the SAS conducted a secret operation to see if the base was secure. And and they were parachuted into Bentwaters. What they didn't realise is that they'd installed a new radar system, and it picked them up, and they got arrested, and they were apparently quite roughed up and ill-treated. So the claim is that to get their revenge, they staged this UFO incident, although there's no evidence for that anywhere. It's just a rumour. No one supposedly in the SAS who was ever involved in this has come forward to say, yes, it was us. I mean, another explanation is that it was an accident on the base, that there was a fire or a missile had been fired by accident, and that they created the UFO story to basically cover up the fact that, half of Suffolk could have been taken out in a nuclear explosion. So it basically, it's a long-winded answer, I suppose, but it's divided the UFO community. There are people who believe it happened, and there's people who believe it's a load of rubbish.
Well, you mentioned radar. Was something like a craft that they had witnessed? Surely that would have been picked up on local radar.
Holt, in his memorandum, which he later wrote, as I said, in January the following year, and sent to the Ministry of Defence, that they weren't interested, I think he refers in there that that he contacted radar stations, and they said yes, they picked an object up. However, others deny this and claim that there are no records from the time of any strange objects being picked up by radar. So again, you get one person says, yes, I phoned up this radar base and they said they picked it up, and then other people say, actually, there's no evidence of that whatsoever apart from your word. So again, it's 50-50.
So I suppose we could look at the fact it's either mistaken identity, a craft really did land that night and was covered up, or it's a complete hoax.
Yes, yeah, or misidentification, and it was literally the lighthouse. I mean, another thing that I will dismiss, when they initially were in the woods, they heard a lot of screaming. I think one of them described it like a woman.
Wow.
But actually you do get muntjac deer in that forest, and I've heard them, and they do cry out, and in the middle of the night it does sound like someone, could be a woman, screaming. They did also said that the farm animals are very agitated, which is interesting. Although, was that because they were in the wood and shining their torches and things like that? But yeah, so it's a very interesting case. We're never going to get to the bottom of it. Something clearly happened, but the problem with that particular incident is that a lot of the people, as I think I said before, kept changing their statements. I mean, for instance, Penniston initially said he never approached the craft, and then said he did. He touched it. He picked up telepathic messages from it. He also claimed that he kept a notebook, which he wrote down at the time, although others said they'd never seen this notebook or him writing anything. There were binary numbers in there, which he later claimed were a message from the future. I think the year 8100, and that this UFO was a time-traveling craft from the future that was getting genetic material to basically save the human race. So, but the thing with that is there was a film in 1993. This is before he made this statement, I believe, called Official Denial. It was a TV film, and it was about a UFO landing, and the person, one of the airmen that was supposedly interacting with a UFO, came up with that very statement. So the suggestion is, that was it from the film? Did he? Because I think he was put under hypnosis, and this is where it all came out. So the suggestion is that he'd seen that film, forgotten about it, and then recounted it as his own experience. And there was an X-Files episode that was very similar as well. But yeah, I mean, you'll get all sorts of theories about this. Another one, that it was a form of plasma, naturally occurring plasma in the forest that affected them. Another one, that it was the US military deliberately conducting a mind control experiment against them to see how they would react under stress. So yeah, so there's I mean, one person even suggested it was a ghost. So there's loads and loads of theories. I've probably counted about 12 so far what it could be.
I suppose what is strange for me is, if it really was something like aliens visiting, would they come back a second night?
Yeah, this is it. There was a break of a day, wasn't it? Because I think it was the 28th they came back, although Holt said it was the 29th. But there was a break of a day. Yeah, but So UFOs have often been seen around military bases, and people still claim to have seen UFOs in Rendlesham to this day, although obviously the military bases are long gone. And we're getting these incidents in America now with these drones over military bases, if they are drones, and they may be something else, who knows. But yeah, it does seem strange.
Do you know what become of Lieutenant Colonel Holt? Is he still around? Does he do interviews?
Oh yes, I believe he's still alive. He does sort of give talks, and he once went to Woodbridge. I was going to go to see him give a lecture, but it was fully booked, so I couldn't get in. But he's still around. Penniston is as well. I believe they're still alive. Correct me if I'm wrong, listeners. But yeah, they're still out there, and they're still talking about it. But Holt, many years later, I think it was 30 years later, did another statement about what happened. And but the trouble was, he sort of, 30 years has gone, and there were things that he said later that he never described at the time. I mean, for instance, these laser beams hitting the ground in front of him and stuff like that, and also laser beams scanning the area of the base where the nuclear weapons were stored, which people at the time denied happened. Other airmen were interviewed and said, we never saw anything like that, because if laser beams had literally been hitting the base, that would have been a really big deal. So, but obviously 30 years has gone by, and perhaps he remembered it incorrectly. But this is a problem, as I said, the story has changed so much over time that what really happened has been lost, unless we go back to those original statements, which are not as elaborate and shocking as the ones that later came out, shall we say.
So you've mentioned Holt and his statements and stuff, and it's changed quite a lot. Is there anything else that he said that sort of struck a chord?
Well, interestingly enough, and as I said, you can listen to the full audio, well, part of it, I should say, on YouTube. When they were in the forest, he said that he saw a red light. Now, obviously, the light from the lighthouse was yellow, although I should point out that one of his colleagues can be heard saying, I think it's yellow, sir. But he also said it was like a blinking eye, and others also said that it was like molten metal falling down from it, and it was moving about. Well, obviously a lighthouse wouldn't be moving around in the forest, and it wouldn't be molten metal, or what appeared to be molten metal dripping down from it. So that is interesting, and that's on the audio tape. So yeah, so clearly something was happening. I don't think it was just a lighthouse. Basically, there was something else going on there.
The lighthouse doesn't make sense. It wouldn't give out static electricity, and there wouldn't be a craft with markings on it like I've never seen before, as one of them quoted. None of it makes sense.
Yeah, well, that was Penniston. Although, as I said before, he did change his statement. In his original statement, he never approached the craft. He drew, as I said, a box with sort of stick-like legs. He later added that. So that is a problem, shall we say.
Did Holt at one point claim he had castings of the markings on the floor?
Yeah, castings were taken in plaster, actually. I know, again, the skeptics claim it was animals that made them, but yeah, casts were made off the ground, which was frozen solid. So, it could be argued that it was quite a heavy craft made those marks, although obviously others claim that they were old marks and that, it's just frozen over.
So thank you very much, John, for coming along. I'm sure the listeners have really enjoyed this podcast, and I hope we're going to get lots of comments, and people, I'm really hoping people share their stories as well.
Yes, yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been very enjoyable.
Thanks, John. You take care.
And you.